So I'm going to call to order the policy committee meeting of the Belton Independent School Board of Trustees. Today is March 1, 2021. It is now about 5 p.m. A quorum is not present, and I am joined by Dr. Matt Smith and various members of his administrative staff. And also with us today is Ms. Holly Waddell.
I'm gonna step out for just a moment.
Okay, all right. Do we have any public comments scheduled?
No, sir.
All right. Matt, you want to take it from here?
Yes, sir. So we have a few big topics and then I guess they're all big topics now that I think about it. We have a couple of big policy discussions to dive into, and then we'll get into policy 116. First thing we're going to bring back is the EIC local, and we've been talking about that. Deanna will give you an update on the next steps as per your feedback from the last meeting.
All right, good evening. So yes, I do want to continue our discussion on EIC local. I wanted to let you know the data that we're gathering, so you would be aware of what we'll be bringing back to you, and then also really to get your input on if there's anything you'd like to add. So what we're looking at is, first, we're looking at course selection compared to rates. So we've been really wrestling with this question about how does our class rank policy, EIC local, impact your course selection and what you want to do as a student and what courses you want to pursue. So we plan to take the class of 2019. At the time that class was not merged, it was separate New Tech and Belton High School. We would merge them and break down within their top 20% how many dual credit courses you took, how many AP courses that you took, if we have your SAT scores and any other data to see if we can draw any conclusions around kind of a break off in that and what impact it has in terms of taking dual credit or AP. That's the quantitative piece. With that, we would like to add a qualitative piece. Since our class of 2019 students are no longer with us, we plan to survey our class of 21 and 22. So our current juniors and seniors, and just ask, have you taken AP courses? Have you taken dual credit courses? Did you, were there courses that you wanted to take, but you didn't take them because of, of an impact on class rank? And just try to get some qualitative data from our students in regard to those perspectives. Like to ask some questions around amount of time they spend studying, impact it has on their ability to participate in extracurricular activities, or does it not impact that? So we may have students that say, I take 6 courses and I'm still able to do everything I want to do. We may have students that say something different. They're just really trying to hear from that student voice. We also plan to gather within our class of 2019, our percentage of students who earn college credit. We're going to define that as you took a dual credit course and you actually earned the credit for it. And then, or did you take an AP course, and we can't actually determine if you received college credit or not, because that's dependent on where you go to school. But what we can say is, if you were enrolled in English 3, did you take the AP exam? Did you earn a 3 or higher? So what percentage of students would have even been eligible for consideration of college credit, and see the difference there? For that component, we plan to use the courses that have both offerings, so we can compare equitably. So English 3, English 4, U.S. History, and Government, those are all, Government Economics, those all have an AP or a dual credit option, so we can see the differences in those. And then finally, to address the questions around college admissions, we plan to talk with the top 7 universities that we feel our students attend. Texas A&M, University of Texas, Baylor, Tarleton, Texas Tech, University of North Texas, and UMHB. Now, one thing those schools all have in common is they are in state. We recognize many students go to school outside of the state, outside of Texas. we were planning on starting with those universities. And so I really kind of want your thoughts around that data, because that's the data we're using to bring some observations and some, data supporting our whole discussion around, is this impacting our students, and if so, how?
What were the 7 again?
Texas A&M, University of Texas, Baylor University, Tarleton, Texas Tech, University of North Texas, and UMHB.
You notice they left out the Harvard of the West, Arizona State University. I don't
Why?
understand why.
I'm sorry, we can certainly add that.
But Texas State's not on there, right?
So we
That's
can add it that, we are, that's really what I wanted to talk with you about. So is there anything else that comes to your mind that you're like, I wanna know? And then also, since we last talked, have there been any conversations that have come here? So I see you're shaking your head yes, so, what are you hearing? What conversations are coming your way?
So before I answer that,
Absolutely.
on the questions that you're asking, right? Is it worthwhile to look at the folks that did dual credit and which entity they took it with, right? So did they take it with UMHB, or did they take it with Temple College versus UTPB, right? Because I think aren't there some differences in how those necessarily transfer, right? So if you take it at UMHB, you may be somewhat stuck with UMHB. And so I don't know how easy or hard it is to segregate that out.
Sure, who knows?
I don't know if that's a good question to ask or not. I don't know.
So in the same vein, I'm curious in regard to the AP classes, if you took it through Belton High School or through New Tech, or, can we divide that up? Can we find out what percentage of kids are getting what on tests depending on what high school they went to, or like Belton? We're not there
Scoring
yet.
higher, they're scoring
Yeah,
like.
I'd like to see,
Sure.
I would like to
Yeah.
see that breakdown. I think that
You mean
would be.
amongst the 3?
Yeah, do we have AP yet though
Yeah.
at LBHS?
Well, I can tell you all that.
So we
No
have,
test yet though,
we
obviously.
have
Yeah,
one
that's it.
course that's open to sophomores, they haven't taken an assessment yet, and that is, I'm really glad you mentioned that. That's why we're using class of 2019 and not class of 2020. Normally, we would just go back up last year, but with the impact of COVID, we didn't want that data skewed. And so we felt like 2019 is actually a very good year. We had a push for increasing our AP, so we should see higher than prior to that push. So, yes, we can certainly break down versus camps. And then, with anything moving forward, as soon as we have like Belton High School data, they'll be included in any data set we run for high school.
Deanna, the top 7 colleges that are attended by our seniors, what, if you have 800 seniors of the ones attending college, what percentage of those seniors is attending these 7?
So we do not have that type of data to report that. In fact, I'm saying these top 7 because if you talk, just based on qualitative data. If you talk with our advanced academics folks, if you talk with the counselors, those are the schools that are gonna rise to the top, but we don't have tracked data on who went where.
Now, Deanna and her team are working on the partnership with the National Student
Yes.
Clearinghouse, and that information will tell us the percentage of students that enroll, what institutions they go to, and the percentage of students that persist, meaning continue in their studies.
Deanna, can you tell me again what issues you're exploring with the class of 2019? Can you tell us again?
Yes, well, so our central question or our concern all along with the SE has been, does this class ranking policy impact the courses students take? And we talked about, would students choose a different course if there was not a class rank attached to that? And so what we want to do is to draw some conclusions around our data. Does our data tell us that you have to take a certain number or amount of courses and where do you fall in the class rank? So if I take all dual credit courses and I never take an AP course, where can I fall in this likelihood? And a lot varies in that. You've got to remember that behind that is also a grade. we're not looking at what grade you earned, but we are looking to see what's the picture paint, how many kids are taking, over the course of their 4 years, 10 AP courses, how many are taking 3, and then where does that fall? And we're asking kids, was there a course, did you take an AP course or a dual credit course because of the impact of class rank in lieu of a course you would have liked to have taken? And if yes, what was the course you would like to have taken? So do I find out in this survey that students say I would have loved to have taken welding, but I didn't think I could because of my class rank, and so then instead I took AP stats? And so we don't know that. We have speculations around that, but we haven't asked, and we're really making sure that we're pulling data in such a way that the data will tell us the story, and we don't have the story pre-written before and pulling data to support a specific story.
And then additionally, then there's the question after that, is that if you did find out that a large number of students didn't take what they really wanted to, do we rewrite the rules of the game and then accidentally mess something else up, right? So
Right,
that's
sure.
like, there's a whole other thing out there as well that we have to be really careful of, and I know you know that.
Absolutely. And so we're just right now, that's where we're pursuing. But what we also know is once we ask a question, it creates, we've got to have some conversation with our staff around why we're asking them. No decisions have been made, but we do want to know. I want to know. It'll be interesting. In talking with students over the course of the years, there have been students that have taken a full load of AP courses, and it's been wonderful for them. They've had a great experience. There's other students that was too much. That was just too much for them. And so we want to create something that supports the student making their individual decision that's best for them.
I don't wanna create work for the sake of work, right? But part of me wants to know if we were to take those top 2 tiers, right? The top 2 weighting levels, right? So VP and then the level down that's on-ramps and dual credit. If we actually collapse those into one, what would that look like? Like, how would that reorder the top 10%, right? So I don't think, right? So, and then one step further, right? Like, if there was no weighting at all, right, and it's now on a 4-point scale, like, actually, what would that look like? I'm just curious to see.
I've thought about it mathematically.
Yeah.
And I asked another math person to verify with me. If you weighted AP and dual credit the same, it would probably tighten like we said originally, that there's a 1,000th of a point difference between being in the top 10. It could tighten that.
Yeah.
Because you have more students going into that number, that are making high grades.
Yeah. And where I'm trying to get to that, right, is like keeping all options open, right?
Right.
Like, if you were to get to the absolute extreme where you weren't weighting anything, right, it was all just on one pool, what would it actually look like? I'm not suggesting that's what we do, right, but I don't know, because it seems to me like we would already have that data, or at least, like we could calculate an unweighted GPA pretty easily.
Of course, ultimately, the reason kids take all AP exams or AP classes, if they're doing that, is because they believe this is what they need to do for a university. If that rule were to change and your GPA you could take dual credit or whatever, they would still do whatever they thought the university they wanted to get into wanted them to do.
Absolutely.
It would not. I don't believe it would change what they chose if they thought their university or their goals would be impacted by doing anything, regardless of GPA in high school or class rank in high school.
I think what I'd like to get us to though is where kids are pursuing the university based on their career choice for the future rather than just on their desire to go to a specific school. And I know that's intertwined, and I get it, and there's legacy, and there's all sorts of things. But there is a whole lot more to learning than there is to a GPA and rank. And so I think that's the part that I think we've got to be able to figure out is do these policies impact student learning in a way that is negatively associated with some of the decisions that students are making, or is it not? And maybe it's not. And I think we'll find out.
Well, and one of the rude awakenings that I think kids that are in that top 7 to 10% need to be counseled on is being in the top 7 to 10% does not get you into the program of your choice at Bishop University. That was a rude awakening for my oldest. So you get in there and it's like, oh, you want to be in the business school? Well, no, I'm sorry, that's not an option for you.
Right.
You had to be in the top 1% of your class for that. So, a lot of that stuff is revealed to them later, and it's shocking, and they need to be counseled about that. And I think then there you have your impact on,
That's right.
okay, what do you really want to do?
I think that's right on. In the early admittance scheme, I think is part of this conversation too. To be early admitted is great. To be early admitted and not study the program that you really want to be studying and you want to pursue for a future career, that's a different conversation. So I think it's all kind of intertwined here.
Matt, if, when we first started the dialogue of these things, about this particular policy, I had it in my mind that there was a problem. But there may not be a problem, right? But I think that I've been thinking about this in my own mind, like there's a problem that I need to look for to try and fix. Am I barking up an empty tree?
I believe the educators in our system will tell you there's a problem.
Okay, all
And I
right.
think it's up to us to examine and to look for some data and look for some feedback and try and figure out the story behind it, because we want to make sure we do it right and for the right reasons.
Yes, that's a perfect segue into your other question, right? Is what conversations have we been having or what have we
Absolutely.
heard? And I would say, so there was a non-school event at Lake Belton last week. After that event, I talked to a set of parents exactly about this, right?
Okay.
And so, and they came to me about it and basically said, hey, look, I went through my daughter's course selections and she wants to do dual enrollment. And we're like, oh my gosh, no, she can't do that. like that's not gonna be weighted the same. We heard the weighting is different, like she can't do that, like we gotta find an AP class for her to be in. Like, oh my gosh, stop, time out. There's a bigger conversation.
Is this particular student wanting to be at UT or A&M?
I didn't go down that path. I can certainly have a follow-up conversation on it, but like there's an example of, okay, student wants to do this, parents want something else to happen because of the way that the ranking or weighting happens. So, and I've had probably 2 or 3 conversations outside my own family, and then within my family, since I now have a high schooler, I've tried to actually not talk about this at home, and it actually came up. So, like I got a kid who's now saying, hey, look, like, can I take a class in the summertime? Like, can I take an art class in the summertime to then make more space for an AP class during the year? Like, that's a conversation that happened in my household, like, within the last week.
Right.
I'm like, oh my gosh.
Starting to play the game.
Yeah.
And
This
I
is fun for
would
me. I will tell you that right
and not to be in the
Yeah.
spot, but the why behind
now.
that
Yeah,
is because they're trying
because they're
to
trying to play the GPA
play the
game.
GPA game.
Yeah, because
So
within
that's the challenge right
Yeah.
there. It's not because there's a genuine interest and I want to take this course in the summer, which will prevent me
Yeah.
from doing some other things I'm interested in. I'm trying to play a game.
Yeah, in this particular case, she would really like to take culinary as an elective somewhere along the line, but has realized that, oh yeah, that's not gonna help me
That's right.
from a GPA standpoint. Because as soon as it was interesting to watch the rankings come out, right? So this is my oldest one. And within 2 hours, the kids had constructed themselves like who the top 17 were. What? And so they're already trying to figure out like how they can pick each
And
other
those
off.
kind of kids, you're not gonna change that mentality.
Yeah.
They're always gonna be scrambling, trying to figure out who's first. It's hard.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I want though, again, if I go back to, and I'm trying to see if I can relate it to our draft beliefs and values, what do you want for kids? I want them to explore deeper learning and something that they're passionate about. Like if they want to become a lawyer, let's figure out the course, no, maybe let's figure out the coursework to
I said the
help
same
them
thing, I'm
further
doing
that.
But the
Holly
flip-
nodded
yeah.
in concurrence.
But the flip side of that is, I would like them to be able to explore something they think they wanna
That's
do,
right.
and figure out now, oh yeah, I don't wanna do this.
Yeah.
Right, before they get in paying the big bucks, and figure that out, right?
Well, I mean, I think about that very example of culinary arts, what life skills would that course provide, no matter
Right.
what career you pursue in life? I mean, I would have benefited from a few more years of culinary arts. My husband will attest to that. You know, and so, I mean, but that's a passion. That was a passion that kids have, and that's what we've got to wrestle with. And we are wrestling with it, and
The best advice that I received in my first year in law school was from a professor that I told him, I said, well, at this school, they don't really cater to the bar, the Texas bar. You can just take, your first year, you can take whatever. And he told me, he said, you know, if you learn how to think right, you learn how to analyze things, get a well-rounded legal education. Don't just take those courses just because you want to pass the bar. If you learn how to think, you know how to find answers, you know how to analyze things, you'll pass the bar. So that's kind of what we're trying to do here.
You just made the argument for the journey of a graduate accountant.
That's right.
Yeah.
But the thing is though, like Janet said, if you start getting into that, you start dissecting that, you start changing that, it creates a whole host of other issues.
It could,
it could.
It could.
depending on how we went about it.
And the challenge is we've got to find what's best, what we believe is best for our students in our system, and then leaving our system, and what's the delicate balance of the two. You know, the colleges are changing rules as we speak. Just read an article on how many of them are moving away from SAT testing. That's gonna create a whole host of issues along the way. And so it's a challenge to be held at what another entity is doing outside of your own. And so we wanna do what's right for our kids, and figuring that out, and that's what we're trying to do. Figure it out, look at data points, have conversations, ask our students, to design a system. I think, like you said at the last meeting, that's the best we can for each and every student.
I don't know how to do it yet either, but I keep thinking of ways that we can do both. So is there a way that we can set up the system policy-wise that allows those students to pursue the AP classes that they want to pursue, not worry about it, but those that are in that boat of really wanting to try something else out, that they're okay trying something else out. Like, some of it is incumbent upon the adults and the way we talk about all of it, equally is to the policy that we have. So that's what's from my head.
I have an idea on that.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I don't know how you would do it, but I wonder if you could, I don't know, I'll just keep it to myself, I'll keep thinking about it. I won't go into the logistics now, but it might be we have a passion course waiting or something.
Passion horse, we'll leave it.
I'll think about that, okay?
We may bring that one back.
I
Who knows?
I don't know, I'll think about that. I don't know, every counselor that was potentially listening just stressed out, because our systems, sometimes our systems are hard to work around as well. And they're very prescribed, so, okay.
So maybe to answer your question, I don't know if there's a problem, right, but there's certainly a game that's being played, and, you know, I guess it depends on which side of you're on, whether it's a problem or not.
There's I'm working on trying to get a movie screening for our board and myself coming up sometime this spring. And in there's a discussion with a student about purpose of school, and whether the purpose of school is to pass a test or to go deeper into learning. And the student looks at the educators with a very blank look and says, it's obviously to pass the test. And it's the whole point of this discussion about what real deep learning is and why we should be pursuing it. So I think we got a lot still to uncover and still to look at.
The what and the why.
Yep.
Right?
That's right,
Are we giving you what you need?
you are.
I just wanna make sure.
I think, no, I mean, I really appreciate the conversations you're having, I appreciate you sharing those. No, I think this is what we wanted to do, just to let you know where we're at and what data we're pulling, because when we meet again, we wanna share that, and I want you to know ahead of time what we're looking at, so that if you do have any other, feedback or thoughts, we'll make sure and capture that in our data.
You know, interviewing students is one way of gathering data. It's gonna tell us some things, right? So what other tools are we gonna use besides interviewing students? We gotta interview counselors, teachers?
We were planning on surveying students so that we could capture more than just an individual interview. We could try to get a broad scope of what students feel, because it is it's individualized into what your experience is, and that's why I went back to one student, you can have both two students taking 10 AP courses over 4 years, and one that's very hard, and it could be the same courses. It's just the load, and one might be fine. So our plan was to really hear from the students. We certainly could expand it to, we'll definitely having conversations with our AP teachers along the way, especially before we send out a survey. Because what we want folks to know is we're gathering information. Don't draw conclusions yet to what we're doing with that information, but we've gotta talk about it. And talk about this, what our kids are feeling.
I think that's a good point to reiterate too, so if you do get questions as board members on why we're talking about it, y'all remember, we were in this discussion last spring, and I think we heard multiple times from many of you that we probably should talk about this policy in more depth. And that's what this study really is, and it's really, we want to approach it as a study. I think we all have individual opinions, but we want to actually do the work and figure out the true story in Belton ISD and how it's playing out, and then go from there.
And the question is, how do we do that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's one way of doing it.
Mhm.
You gather a piece of evidence, but where else are we gonna look besides that?
We've studied other policies, we looked at other policies across, the state. I think what we come down to is what are our students experiencing? And I think when you hear the student voice on it, they're the ones living it. And then you hear the, college admissions voice on what will it do? How will that impact a student that leaves us and enters their systems?
Then you mentioned Westlake,
Mm-hmm.
about
We
the.
talked about them last week, or last minute.
Yeah, you mentioned Westlake and what happened in Westlake with the increase in college admissions, right?
Right.
You know,
So, but we're gonna gather the data ourselves, so they've actually provided us with their research, but we're calling ourselves, that's been a couple years, and we wanna make sure that we're talking to somebody current in admissions processes at those, universities. I can, and, see what they say, where they see a difference in impacting students. They're experiencing it, remember, they're experiencing it not only with the Texas schools that are moving towards, either changes in the way they weight or no class rankings, but they're also experiencing it with many out-of-state applicants that are coming from schools that do not rank. Texas is one of the states, we talked about that does rank more than, other non-Texas schools, high schools.
So there was another actually twist on this conversation that came up as well, just to me. So I talked to a family of a BHS student, when the ranks came out about BHS plus UTEC, right? Because I think this is BHS student who is probably hovering right around that 10% mark and was freaking out about combined and now I'm not going to make it, right? So, I certainly don't have the answer to that, but those conversations are happening too. I've had at least 2 of those now as well. But
I think diving into some data, and Janet brought up earlier, I think it's a good point, being able to just look at the AP data and the scores, and then look at the GPAs and how the ranking is kind of played out by student over the past few years. Will also help paint some of our picture. That data set that Deanna's team's pursuing too, I think will help us know as well, because us knowing what percentage of kids are actually college going in Belton ISD and continuing, persevering through those college years, I think is good data for us as well.
Very good.
Okay, very good.
She doesn't get to go anywhere, she's next on the
I'm
agenda
next,
too.
I'm excited about this one.
We talked about this before.
The next one is, this one's a little bit easier.
EIE, oh, I'm just gonna start, all right, and then there's me.
That's all the intro you
That's
need.
okay. I am really excited about EIE, not that I'm not excited about the others, but this is, last year, we came to you with the change to EIE, and if you'll recall, that was to implement standards-based grading in kindergarten and first grade. And so we moved away from a numerical system, and we outlined standards. We developed tasks. We worked with those teachers to develop performance tasks that they would measure throughout the year, and they would report if students were approaching or meeting standard on those tasks. And then that's how they would demonstrate that. That would become their report card, and there would no longer be numerical. That has been extremely successful. Our teachers, now anytime it's new, it's been a challenge, but it has strengthened our program. It's strengthened their knowledge of students and where they're at, as is expected with standards-based grading. And it's provided parents with a clear understanding of what a student needs to know and where they are in their learning. And so with that, we, as we mentioned last year, we are moving to second grade. We would like to expand that and continue it on through second grade. I'm not sure we'll stop at second grade. I think it'd be great if we could do that all the way through. But we've got to go, right now we want to go year to year with our students. And so this policy revises our standards-based grading to be kindergarten through second grade, and then our numerical grading to be third through fifth. And so that's the only change in there. I do plan at the March board meeting to provide you all with an update on our House Bill 3 goals. And in that report, I'll be sharing with you where our students are based on this progress. So being able to look, so now we can look at a TEAC. So we chose a TEAC that we had assessed in the first 9 weeks through the second 9 weeks, and we're able to determine what percentage of our students have mastered that TEAC or approaching that TEAC. We've never been able to give that level of data on a numerical grading system. We all know numerical grading systems are challenging. Even when we try to streamline from one teacher to the next, there's just so much variability. So we feel like that's given us some better data for our students. So this policy would expand that through second grade.
I'm trying to think of, I taught second grade, and I'm just trying to think how much more beneficial this would have been to sit with parents at conferences and say, this is what your child is doing, this is where they're still working on, and being able to say that specifically. Instead of just like,
So exciting.
I think it would have been really helpful as a teacher to be able to express where their kid was, and it was so hard to do that with a numerical grade. The only way you could do it was with some little tests that we gave, benchmarks and TPRI, things like that.
Right.
But we didn't have daily sets of skills that we were working towards. And often they'd come to us in second grade and maybe their grades, number grades had gone down to 80 or something like that, and they'd say, well, they made straight A's in first grade.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
No, exactly. And it's been good for our teachers because with standards-based grading, you're having to identify what is a performance task that my students are going to do to demonstrate their knowledge of a concept, and then they're going to do that multiple times so that it's not a one-time test or one-time activity that I did and now I average those grades and here's my grade. It's truly assessing throughout the 9 weeks. And so I feel like it's making our system stronger. Our principals have said that, our teachers have said that. We had, to my knowledge, no resistance, which on our second grade, I mean, they were ready, they're like, yes, let's move forward, we've heard some great things, even with the general struggles that come when you implement something new. I mean, and I just wanna applaud publicly for anyone that's listening, our kindergarten and first grade teachers, for taking this on. It was a big learning curve.
Deanna, do teachers set these goals individually for their classrooms, or do they do it as a team?
So we have a standard, but like we have a, I don't wanna call, it's a report card that has the assessments that will be, the skills that will be assessed. And then our team has been working with kindergarten and first grade to align how they'll assess those, so that there's more uniformity across the system. I mean, there's still, as an individual teacher, so you always have, even in a rating scale, you can always have some variability, but we work to really strengthen the uniformity around that. So no, a teacher won't just have to decide on their own what they'll assess. We are building the second grade now.
How does this strengthen knowledge? I mean, I'm still trying to figure out, I mean, I know it's easy for you guys being educators, but I don't.
Okay, so let me give you
Because
an
kids are gonna perform at different
Sure.
levels.
So let me give you an example. On a numerical system, my child would have had 100 in reading. 100. I would have gotten the report card. I saw he had 100, and I would have thought, "Rock on, you're awesome! You're so smart!" But at the end of the year, he wasn't really reading at the level we needed him to read at. Under this system, I would have known of the 100 sight words he needs to know. He has currently, he's approaching those, and he's learned 50, and here's those that he doesn't know yet. And now I'd be able to really target skill what those were. When in a 100, I'm gonna see the assignments that teacher's done. But those assignments vary across the system. But in a standard space, I know this is what they're assessing. I would know how many, I live in the kindergarten, they look at, what letters does he know, what sounds has he mastered. And so then I'm given multiple indicators in reading, math, science, and social studies about whether he's mastered or met or is approaching his learning. And so now I know kind of better how to support him in his learning at times.
And so the exciting thing for me as a parent, right, so I also have one at the other end of the spectrum, right, first grader.
That's right, yes,
Yeah, so I'm
you're
getting
living both
I
these
got the full gamut here,
policies.
right? So like we got to figure out like, okay, great, he was having problems with some of these sight words, right? And they could then take action at home, and we made this like popsicle stick game where we read these sight words on popsicle sticks and stuck them in a cup. And at dinner time, we're taking out a popsicle stick, and he's reading off, and there's a couple like bonus sticks in there, or like whammies that like wiped out all your progress. But like we could take action at home because we had finer detail about like where he was struggling in the classroom.
So you as a parent think it's been very beneficial?
I do. Now oddly enough, like I've heard zero feedback, right, on this particular change, right? But just from my own personal experience, is every family gonna do the same thing? No, right? But it does give me another tool as a parent to interact and engage and hopefully help back up what's happening in the classroom.
I think the thing that always resonated with me is you take a student that's got an 84, what does an 84 really mean? Or a 77, or you know what I'm saying? How does that demonstrate what the kid knows and can do based on that class and those standards in the class? And this allows us to be more explicit with the learning. So getting more toward a mastery concept of learning, these are the things we're trying to master in this area versus earning a numeric grade, because to Janet's point, they got all A's last year, they got all 100s last year, whatever it might be. That's the reality that we've been living.
Yeah, and most parents, without an education background themselves, that not being in classrooms, when they see a numeric grade, their only paradigm for that is basically high school, college. Like that's the way they're thinking of it, is
Exactly.
this is kind of where you fall in regard to your other peers. But it doesn't, for an elementary student, young ones especially, it gives you no information.
Correct. that's why I'm very, I feel like this has been a huge step in the right direction for our students and parents.
So in other words, the numeric grade is not reflective of anything. It's not accurate. That's what the kid is learning.
It's accurate, it's just not detailed, there's no detail behind it.
But like in math's 84, right, in theory, an 84 means you can do 84% of the teats, right? I mean, I think that's kind of what it
But
means,
which ones can they?
but which ones can you, right? Like,
What did they get?
what's the 16% that
What-
they didn't
what are
get,
we
right?
missing?
I have no visibility into that as a parent, right?
And next year's teacher wouldn't have it.
Right, well,
And
yeah,
This
so,
gives them information.
right, so going down the path of, okay, each and every student, and we wanna be able to kind of understand where each kid is and get them the targeted need for, well, here it is, right here, right? Like,
In kindergarten, I remember in the past, it's kind of gone back and forth. It used to have these sorts of measures, and then it would go to your numeric grades, and then it kind of went back and forth, so.
I mean, we used to have checklists, and so this is truly, this is their report card, and this is how they're measured, and there is no numerical that was another shift, like, we're not gonna transfer this into numerical swan.
so what would it take to get from where we are today, not just to second grade, right, but through fifth grade, right? I mean, what would that take?
So that's interesting that you asked that, because I'm having that conversation right now with our team, like how do we accelerate this? Could we accelerate this? So that we just keep building, that we continue. I mean, you can continue to build your master's, what your TEKS and what you're going to, your standards, what you're gonna assess on, and we just keep moving with the system. I'm gonna take a mind shift, just like it has in kinder and first. I mean, there's no law that says you need numerical grades technically until you're in UI. I mean, the only thing that's dependent on a numerical grade within our system is a UIL. And so beyond beyond sixth grade, we'd have to think through how would you integrate it with the UIL system.
That's kind of why I stopped in fifth grade, because
Right, but through
that's
fifth grade.
easy, like, that's the easy part, right? You get past there, it gets really
Right.
hard.
One of the other states I lived in when I was an administrator there, state law was passed that we had to report on progress to parents on meeting standards. So the report cards couldn't just be a numeric grade anymore, we also had to report out on progress toward meeting standards. And they went about it the exact opposite of the way you should in policy. They didn't create any demand with the teachers and the school districts. This is a legislative decision. But as a second, I was the principal supervisor for secondary schools there. And we had to come up with a report card basically that would provide a numeric grade and additional information on the most important standards that were identified by the teacher and how the student was progressing in those areas. It was a fascinating discussion because it forced a reckoning between a numeric grade that the student was getting and those standards that they're supposed to master in that class. And sometimes those two things were in conflict. So it's a worthy topic for us to keep exploring. I do think it gets pretty tricky at the secondary level.
So the idea is to present this at the next meeting of the second meeting.
Yes,
There's only two little changes, right?
correct. Just the change from, just to the grade levels and that, but the rest of the policy stays exactly as written.
Have you seen this in place in any other districts?
Yes, there are other districts that do standards, that have standards-based grading. And we looked at that when we were revising ours and writing ours, so we could see commonalities. I believe Round Rock was one that we looked at closely, because we also, we wanted to see what was best standard-wise for all our classrooms, and that also includes our bilingual classrooms. And so we also have our standards-based grading in Spanish for our bilingual parents.
What's the most significant thing you're hearing from teachers?
Just the stretch it's taken to really identify what those performance tasks are and to rethink how they're assessing students. And to kind of get that pacing down in terms of how often they identifying what that task is and really thinking through it and then repeating it to give multiple opportunities. But it's a challenge, it's a,
You said these tasks are based on the teams themselves.
on the teachers themselves. Any other?
Any other questions?
All right,
The-
thank you very much.
Thank
Wait,
you.
are we doing retention or promotion, or are we done with that? Is that the same, that was part of that?
No, that was a-
That's it.
That is the
Just a quick thing on that then, because there was one about, placing a child who has been retained at an age-appropriate campus, and that did not make sense to me, and I think I'm just reading it wrong.
placing a.
It was on page 9, but this is the board book one, so I'm not sure. It was on,
Is it in the EIE local team?
Yeah, that's
It's
the one.
policy, right here, so it's on the very end, so.
Page 3 and 4.
right there, wait.
Yeah, hold on.
Hold on, I should know it, but
It's the bottom of page 9. What three of
Okay, the student's
Assignment of
GPC
retained
determines that it would be in the student's best interest to be assigned to the same or some, okay, go up one, go right up there. In the event a student is not promoted to the next grade level, the district shall nevertheless assign the student to an age-appropriate campus. What does that mean?
wait, which one, where are you at
It
again?
is assignment of retained students.
In the event a student is not promoted, the district shall nevertheless assign the student to an age-appropriate campus unless, okay. So that comes into play, with your overage students in a grade level. So if I, have, failed 8th grade multiple times,
Okay, multiple.
and so I'm 16, and I have not been successful, I can place you at an age-appropriate campus, which would be the high school. So I would place you in the high school. You didn't promote to high school, we placed you in high school.
Okay, but then what classes would you take?
Your freshman classes, I would start you off as freshman. And then we work with the counselors to start to work to ideally get you the support you need so that you can graduate as close to on a time of your peers as possible. But we don't, this allows us to avoid, multiple retentions at a campus that would not be in the best interest of that student.
Yeah, I wrote a note to myself here on that same page. If you move up, you see where it says transfer students?
Uh-huh.
Right above that, it's talking about the appeal with the, grade placement committee.
Yes,
At the end of the paragraph that's above transfer students, is there any appeal after that, or is that where the buck stops?
that's where it stops. Are you talking about on the principal designee shall monitor students the GPC process? That's where it stops.
That's it, so there's no appeal after that?
No. I mean, I guess you could, I'd have to think through if you could appeal through a just regular grievance policy on a placement of a student and follow a different policy. But that has not come into play because we've, worked with our campuses to, so in that GPC process, you identify in that process the very specific criteria that a student has to meet so that we can avoid
Okay.
a student not, there being any ambiguity around what a student should or shouldn't complete in that process.
Who's on the grade placement committee?
It can vary, it would be, a principal or administrator designee knowledgeable of the students' academic performance, teachers. If you're in a grade placement committee for high school, they try to have, I believe they try to have the teachers for students who are unsuccessful in the course. Or I'm thinking about, the EOC process as well, if you're doing that. And just, it may have a counselor, it just depends on, kind of similar to other at-risk committees they have, but they have members that know the student and can talk about their progress. What would be the best informational decision for that student.
Because there is an appeal process in the Texas Administrative Code for grade placement committees, and we've got the composition of it in the legal policy that corresponds with this. And so there is an appeal process, but I don't know that it's spelled out there in the administrative code. But I don't know that it's something that would come to the board. It's not laid out.
Okay.
Administrative code.
So it's spelled, it takes you to the administrative code
It
at some
does.
point, okay.
Right, and actually, in the EIE legal, it's on page 8, and if you want to look at that, it's pretty long, pretty involved, but there is a process for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions for Deanna?
I'm good.
Can I regress for just a second?
Sure, you can.
On the EIC local?
Yes.
Yeah. Just one question.
We're going back to that one, yeah.
When we
Yeah.
go back and talk about, when are you gonna have some information for us? Is that like
At our
next
next,
meeting?
at our next
Or-
call.
I just wanna see what the timeline was.
Yes,
I
at
mean,
our
it
next.
doesn't, it can be whenever you go.
We've started pulling that data.
Okay.
What I wanted to do today was share with you what we're
Yeah.
pulling to make sure we're in line on that, and then we will have that to discuss at our next call.
Okay, all right. I mean, it doesn't have to be next meeting, just whatever you guys think.
Well, we need to get it, we need to keep moving on
Right,
this,
I know
because if we're gonna implement changes, this year in any way we need to do that sooner rather than later.
And if we do implement changes, when should we do it? By the end of the school year?
Well, so you have students choosing courses, so typically with EIC, the advice I've always been given is that you start it with your incoming freshmen, so that next class. If you're only looking at, AP and dual credit, we don't have students starting dual credit until their junior year. So I think you could consider it, I would talk to Holly, looking at her, with a sophomore class, but kids are choosing courses now. Now, they have time before August to change their trajectory or change their courses, but like, as Chris said, you're talking about now, what course am I gonna take next year? And so, we'd have to be very thoughtful in if that would be impact a current class or wait for a freshman. Freshmen do not choose dual credits. Freshmen are not choosing between AP and dual credit. So if you implemented it with the freshman class, then you would give them all that time to really start to decide which would be best for them. Or you'd have until they chose classes in March. Our kids are choosing classes right now for next school year.
Wow.
Ideally, what you really want to do is be ahead of it far enough so that it impacts how you communicate with your course catalogs, how your counselors talk to families about it, how your teachers talk to students who are recruiting students for their classes. So this is something you got to get ahead of as much as you can. So if there's substantive changes to this policy, that's one of the things we'll need to talk about and what the appropriate timeline is to implement those.
So just kind of further that, we try to have a course catalog ready by December, distributed out to students in January, February, and they begin course selections officially in March.
We gotta keep moving.
Yeah, keep moving.
Gotta keep moving, gotta keep talking about it. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Deanna. Okay, Matt.
DEA local, I think, we had a request at our recent board meeting to talk about DEA local, and this is on compensation and benefits. And
Our last meeting, right?
Mr. Schiller
Our last one, yeah.
is here to talk to us a little bit.
So DEA, that's our plan, that's our policy that addresses compensation. Pay administration, pay schedules, salary increases for contract employees and non-contract employees. And then goes into two different topics, which is, I think, what we'll have to have some discussion on. And one of them is pay during closure, coming off the heels of the the ice capade that we had a couple of weeks ago. Kind of reviewing that. And then the other section is a section called premium pay, which we do not have in our current policy. And so our current policy, under pay during closure, we pay employees during emergency closure for the work days if they're not being rescheduled, if we're not scheduling those work days to be made up. And the authorization to pay should be by resolution. And that's in just what our pay during closure is. I attached some other policies from other districts. Midway and Georgetown, which are very similar, I think exactly the same. Theirs indicate during an emergency or closure, all employees should continue to be paid for their regular duty schedule unless otherwise provided by board action. And then the board shall adopt a resolution to take out a board action established by the purpose and parameters of such payment. And then it goes into premium pay, and it's basically premium pay is addressing non-exempt employees. And non-exempt employees will be paid at a rate outlined in this policy for Midway and Georgetown, would be at the rate of 1.5 times the regular pay for all hours worked. And then overtime for actual hours worked over 40. That's the same thing as Georgetown ISD. Round Rocks is a little different. Round Rocks is for non-exempt employees, they call it emergency pay. Non-exempt employees are required to report to duty to respond to a natural disaster or other catastrophic event. Superintendent who declared an emergency are authorized overtime to be paid at 2 times the regular hourly rate. Exempt employees required to report to duty shall be compensated at a rate commensurate with their assigned emergency duties as determined by the superintendent. And then it goes into a pretty big section about district closure as well. Again, it talks about non-exempt employees in that area and being required to report to work, and they'll be paid at 2 times the regular hourly rate pay. And then Temple ISDs, similar language there, paid during closure as Georgetown and Midway. But their rate of pay on premium pay is at 1.5 times the regular hour rate. And so I'd kind of like to open it up for discussion. Just kind of what are y'all's thoughts on some of this? What would y'all like to see in the policy? If you want similar to one of these, we could talk about maybe having something else in there.
So in the spring, when we shut down, was this part of that as well?
So in the spring, we passed the resolution. Yeah. So we passed the resolution. In that resolution, we included premium pay that's part of that resolution and paid at the rate of 2 times the hour.
For a time period, and then after a while, it went back to regular.
So that resolution, it was pretty open-ended and related to COVID. There wasn't really a time period really associated with that. It was an open-ended thing. And then once we all get back to work, we did that. Now, we did adjust the premium pay a little bit.
That's what she's referring to.
Okay. Yeah, we did adjust premium pay. We did start off with the premium pay of it was 2 times the hourly rate, and then we kind of backed off of that a little bit as more and more people got back to work and we got back to routine.
Why didn't we put an ending to that?
Why didn't we?
To that resolution that Jazz talking about?
Because for that specific resolution is because we had no idea how long we'd be lasting and all of that. So that gave us flexibility, and that's why we do the report every month as to the actions taken according to that resolution, so that you know as a board exactly what's been done. But the reason why we didn't put a timestamp on that one was because we didn't know how it was all going to play out.
I think in that resolution, they did say for any events related to this COVID pandemic or during this COVID pandemic. So, again, we didn't know how long COVID.
I know, for example, some districts did put a date on theirs, and then they ended up having to bring it back in December and stuff, and ask for another resolution from the board. We did not at that time. Holly, is that pretty typical what you're
It
seeing?
is, if I put a time limit on it, I would have said like through May 31st.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't have gotten us,
Yeah.
a fourth of the way through. But, yeah, that was, I guess it was, lucky that we didn't have one on that, but normally you do, you put some type of ending criteria or condition.
Should we put an ending criteria on things?
As a general rule, yes, for the most part, unless you need some type of criteria to indicate that it won't go on in perpetuity.
Right, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So for good hygiene, at some point, should we go back and actually rescind that?
Yes, probably,
Yeah.
or just indicate that, you know, that it's over, right?
Right,
That this
right.
resolution's no longer in place,
Right.
and address it through policy going forward. As we had these contingencies come up a number of times within the last couple of years, weather-related closing, or, you know, pandemic.
And as I reported in, I think it was December or January, when we implemented the COVID resolution update, you know, we are still continuing with the FFCRA, or at least that practice of it, and offering that, even though that true FFCRA, Friendly First Coronavirus Response Act, truly is a December 31st. The plan is to do that through the end of this school year.
It seems like, I mean, if it's, the way it's written, it could go on,
Yeah.
you know, perpetually, forever.
Mhm.
But it seems that we have a duty to, as a board, to oversee those kind of things, don't we? I mean, so should we put some sort of, something to kill, a kill provision in there, or something where it's revisited at a certain time?
Yes,
I think definitely, I jotted a note down, I think maybe talking about the summertime, marking an end to that resolution and moving forward from there.
Because it's, I mean, if something is gonna end, you can always bring it back.
Mhm.
Sure.
So, I wanted this to come here because, like, just the wording as it stands kind of strikes me funny, right? So the way I read it, like, you almost, like, we need to authorize it before it happens, right? And that's not feasible, right? I mean, we've got an amazing team who stepped up and did hours of work that we technically didn't authorize ahead of time, right? That they absolutely should have been doing, right? And so we would never, you know, I would never want to say, we're not gonna pay them for that, right? That's ridiculous, right? So, so I don't like the way this is worded.
Which part are you talking about?
All right, so, I'm looking at, page 1 and 2, that pay for closing, right? So if the board chooses to pay employees during emergency closing.
last paragraph?
Yeah. And so, and I don't know that this is necessarily consistent with, is this wholly consistent with our precedent, right? So I guess this says if their day is scheduled to be made up, then maybe we don't have to do it, but I think even in the days where we do have closures, it's possible that somebody's doing work, right? I mean, if somebody shows up to the bus barn in anticipation of, you know, classes, but then we call it off, like, they still showed up, they still did work, like, they need to be paid for that work.
Yeah, it's very possible you could have some facilities guys show up.
Right.
Sanding down sidewalks and stuff, and then.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
Yeah, so, you know, this just kind of seemed funky to me, and so I wanted to make sure that we honored what our, you know, our precedent was, right? Like, how do we actually do business, and let's make sure that the policy reflects that.
Yeah.
I thought that, you know, the corresponding pay for closing in like Georgetown, like that seemed to be, it was interesting that a bunch of these are all the same. You know, it kind of seemed to me that, like, hey, look, we're saying in advance, okay, great, like, we're gonna go ahead and pay the regular duty schedule, unless otherwise provided for the board. So we're saying up front, hey, look, in this case, we're gonna pay these people, right? And I think that's the right thing to do. Now, it still says we need to adopt a resolution, right, which, again, I think is also the right thing to do, to acknowledge that it's happened and what the cost of that is, and, you know, to eliminate the feeling of, okay, we've just written a blank check, right, like, because that's not a good feeling. So it does put the appropriate, I think, boundaries in place, but honors the people that we need to keep us operating, right? I don't know. So, I mean, I certainly like the language that is in Georgetown, because I think it's replicated in Midway, like word for word. You know, in that particular item. The emergency pay, I don't know, I guess we can talk about that more, but, yeah.
It's clear.
Yeah, I just think we owe it to everybody to
Mhm.
get it right, if that's who we say we are.
Especially after this last year.
Yeah.
So any concerns with the Georgetown language on premium pay, and just obviously, I guess, you know, to keep the practices always, ours would be 2 times the hourly rate, which is similar to, I guess, around our ISD. Again, this is for just those non-exempt employees who have to come in.
Okay, so, was last week though, was it last week? Man, I lost all track of time. I think technically it was declared a disaster, right? I think.
But, yeah,
Yeah,
Yes.
state-
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and so if we had this language in place last week, instead of doing one time, right, like actual hours, right, it would have actually been 2 times, right? So we would have actually behaved differently last week. I don't know, right, I mean, I think there's so much to the definition of a disaster.
I think that there's a grouping too that we have to decide, example, who emergency personnel would be.
Right.
Because especially in this time right now, I think we need to be as clear as we can with staff, and I mean, who knows where we'll be in another year regarding pandemic stuff, I have no idea. But we, as clear as we could be, and to say what groups would qualify for premium pay or emergency pay, versus what groups would be expected maybe to continue if there's a prolonged period of shutdown. Example that I can think of, if you have an educational assistant working from home, using their computer to help with instruction from home, I don't know necessarily if that is the same as paying double time for somebody fixing a pipe at 3 a.m.
Right.
And we probably need to be explicit in whatever decision we make coming up.
Yeah, because I got heartburn about just saying blanket, it's 2 times.
And I think that's a tricky one because you can't plan for all of the unknowns, but I think this last year has given us some good experience in realizing what we might need to talk about.
Because I think the impact of this, and talking to Jennifer, was, I don't know, a couple tens of thousands of dollars, right? I mean, it wasn't hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, right? It was like $20,000 or $30,000 or something like that.
But that one from Georgetown, I mean, people are being required to work. I mean, I think that's the operative term there, is being required to work. Did you require the maintenance folks to work during the, to check the pipes were freezing and all that? I mean, the custodial folks? I mean, how did that go about?
We had an emergency crew that was out responding to all of those things, that's for sure.
Fixing pipes, sprinklers, whatever.
Now that, and Mike, feel free to weigh in on how that looked, but I mean, that depended on the individual family and their circumstances too. If you got somebody who can't really even get out of their driveway in a situation like that, that's a different story, so. Anything you wanna add, Mike?
Yeah, we tried to hold off on anything that would be non-emergency as far as cleanup, restoration, checking cafeterias, until the roads had cleared. But we did have a 7 to 8 man emergency crew that, I mean, they were out dealing with the emergencies. So, obviously we could have worked around if 1 or 2 had situations, we might have brought a different team member in. But, the number 1 priority at that point was to try to minimize as much as further damage as we could. So I guess required is kind of a loose word. I mean, we needed them and they responded, but, we definitely have a crew of, just like we have an on-call, night facilities, and a weekend facilities number. So if there's a pipe on the campus or a leak or something like that, there's always a number you can call that someone will respond to. We just kind of, we had to ramp that team up a little bit, in a weather event like this.
Oh, you were gonna say
I
something?
was just gonna say, to this point, the Round Rock language, emergency pay, may provide a little bit more of a clarification. It says, in the event non-exempt employees are required to work, to report to duty, to respond to a natural disaster or other catastrophic event, then the superintendent then they can be paid 2 times. So maybe that clarifies it a little bit, if they're responding to a natural disaster weather event. And then, under district closures for Round Rock, it addresses, I guess, things that are district closures, but maybe they're not a disaster.
Great.
So that's got some interesting language in that too, and that, they adopted that policy back in 2016, so it's pretty interesting.
Is there anything else as a policy committee that y'all would like to see us explore in this as Todd's doing some more research and we start to put together some potential first draft language and stuff for y'all to think about, any other items in this policy.
You know, I like the fact that they're referring to a disaster that's declared by state, federal officials. But we even have the discretion there, according to the Georgetown policy, we can declare our own disaster, right? Because we may have a disaster that's unique to us and not unique to anybody else,
That's true. Very true.
right? I mean, we could be experiencing a disaster, I don't know what it could be, but, it'd have to be something pretty ugly, right?
These days, anything.
I was gonna say, knock on wood, everybody, please.
Don't tempt 2021.
Yeah.
So I can try to work up some language for next meeting, and have some of that kind of.
Yeah, one of the things was so it's not in perpetuity. You know, I do like the fact that, you know, maybe someone needs to have some discretion, that you need to have some discretion. Like if we're in a situation where you can't get to a board meeting for another 3 weeks or whatever, for whatever reason, then you have that discretion. I think we need that in there too.
It's one of those, I think I told y'all when we did that first resolution a year ago, it's one of those really tricky ones, because as a superintendent, I don't want authorities granted to me on a temporary basis that I don't have to absolutely have. And so the more we can avoid these resolutions that are outside of policy or outside of, that makes me feel better. So I think we'll put some good effort into it. I think we
Of course, somebody's gotta be in charge during a disaster.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I'd just like the disaster to end one of these days.
All right,
You good?
I'm good.
All right, thank you, sir.
Hey, Todd.
In the next section that we have are the updates for 116. We've got CQB, Local Tech Resources, Cybersecurity. Daryl and Todd, any updates for us on that?
No, the policy really is just a reiteration of the training that's required, for staff to go through. And so that's just documented there in the policy. And then we do this know before training, this is the program we use, and we submit that out every springtime, right?
So from a cybersecurity standpoint, do we have, like, what is our stated policy for how people report an incident? Like, I know, like, and here's an example, right? Like, in the last 3 months, I've probably received like 2 or 3 legitimate phishing emails to my BISD account.
Yeah.
Right, but other than sending somebody an email about it, like, I couldn't tell you what their reporting process is.
Yeah, so I know in that know before training, I mean, it talks about like what to report when you see a phishing type of email,
Yeah.
and who to report it to.
Yeah.
So it could be removed from the system or blocked, that email could be blocked from coming into the district and those types of things.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we do from a corporate standpoint is we've actually partnered with, I'd have to go back and figure out who it is, but we've got a button that's been added to our Outlook, right, where you can basically report it from there, right? Like, as long as the message is highlighted, you don't even have to have it open, right? As long as the message is highlighted, you can hit the report button and it'll go. I mean, I have no idea what that costs, but, or what the incidences of that in this environment are.
Sounds like we're working on something like
We're working on the know before button.
Okay.
Flex and sends it to.
Okay.
Have you changed your spam settings for BISD email? Cause I get nothing.
Uh,
I don't get stuff I need.
Well, yes, like, I've got, that's a whole other conversation, yeah, there's like, yeah, all kinds of stuff gets stuck in that spam filter that probably shouldn't, but.
I mean, my spam filter's empty. I don't even have a spam folder.
Oh, are you serious?
Oh, wow.
Wow.
We
Yeah,
might wanna check that.
Yeah, I definitely have a spam folder, and it catches all kinds of stuff, like, it'll catch emails from like Joe Average in the spam, and unless I'm like actively looking, like, going through all those things, like, there's stuff like that.
Now, I guess I do get that spam quarantine email.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking
Yeah.
about? Okay. But you don't, like, if you were to click on your spam folder, there's
Oh, it
nothing,
doesn't go there.
that's
yeah.
empty. Okay.
You have a lot in your spam folder?
Yeah.
Really?
I hardly ever look at it.
I think I have 2.
It's all education related, at least it's what I can tell.
You're scared to find out on some of them.
Well, I mean, I know enough, I'm not clicking the
I'll
link.
click on the BISD
So we do have the training and stuff in place, and we'll continue with that, and we're,
I mean, when we took the training, I mean, I think the training was good.
mhm.
And it's certainly on par with, the similar kinds of stuff we do in the corporate space, so, yeah.
I got one today, this one that Daryl and I talked about already, but it's an Office 365 one that was wanting me to upgrade or something. And you look at the email address, and it's not coming from anybody that should be sending that, so. It's funny enough. Could be this.
The training worked.
That's right. Great, thank you, Todd.
Thanks, sir.
Oh, you're the next one too, sorry. PCD local employment practices at will employees.
I think that really just changing some language to make it a little clearer. The intent's the same, they still have to follow through the business process.
FFAC local wellness and health services. Oh, he's got a big binder. This
This is all of it, I like to see
It's in
individuals.
the house.
So this is a policy, y'all may remember, we actually visited this last year whenever we, talked through the process of, having an unassigned epinephrine on campuses, and we modified this policy to allow that and have it written and approved by the board. So, you can see if you look at the update 116 to local, there are a lot of, changes recommended by TASB. This is the one policy out of the whole 116 update that we, as a health services department and an operations department, would like to discuss a little bit, whether we would accept all the recommended changes or not. The reason for so many changes, whenever, TASB kind of put out their recommendations, was to align policy with current Department of State Health Services guidance, to include only those board level decisions, and to remove provisions that are more appropriate to administrative regulations. So you can see they're trying to streamline and take out things that probably could be included in administrative guidelines. There are two things though that are kind of particular to our policy that after talking it over, and I feel like we've had a very well-led health services department for the last decade or so, and a lot of thought went into this policy with Charlotte and her team. And there's a couple of things that if you look under the sections where it said medication, the idea in point 2 for non-prescription medication, we really like our policy, the way it was written, we would only provide that non-prescription medication for a period of up to 5 days with the parent's written request. And after that 5 days, we would like a physician or other healthcare professional to write that it would continue. That's aligned with the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations, and it kind of protects our staff that we have this indefinite disbursement of non-prescription medication at the request of a parent. So that would be one thing we would like to discuss and maybe consider keeping in our policy. And then the second part is when you go down to 4A, we felt like that was something that allowed our, as a designated professional, we in Belton, we've allowed our athletic trainers to, under certain circumstances, to administer certain non-prescription medications. And as Charlotte and I talked through this, we definitely wouldn't want to lose that practice. And we thought that leaving item 4 intact would allow us to maintain that practice as well. So just discussion on those two things. As far as the other changes, we can definitely go along. Some of these are understood, some of these are covered in legal, and some of these are covered by just some of the forms that parents fill out at the beginning of the year. But just a 5-day limit on non-prescription medications at the request of a parent, and still allowing in some circumstances with parental consent our athletic trainers to be able to administer. Generally, it's an ibuprofen or Pepto-Bismol or something along those lines.
So what's here, the markup that's here is basically what TASB says, and you're saying, hey, look.
TASB's saying we can still do those things, but we can do those just as easily in administrative guidelines.
Yeah.
We know that might be two items that we might have parent pushback on, especially on the non-prescription issuance after 5 days. If it's in policy, then that gives a little more, I guess, meat for the staff. And I haven't even had a chance to discuss this with Holly much yet, so she might have an opinion on that one way or the other as well. But we were those are two things that we felt like were pretty important to protect our staff and also to protect our students too. We don't want an indefinite, time period of doling out non-prescription medicines without a doctor's consent.
Agreed.
Of course, the administrative guidelines, that's just the procedure by which you carry out the policy, right?
That's right.
So we need to have it in policy.
Yes, we would prefer to keep it in
Right.
policy.
I think you're right, yeah. Holly, what do you think?
My thinking is that, sometimes, in my experience, administrative guidelines, are not as easy to find as your policies, which are available online 24/7 and updated continuously. I've just seen people, you have a change in staff and then, we forget that we had this regulation. And with medication, this is an area where your staff faces greater exposure to liability if they don't follow, district guidelines and district policy. And so I would want this to be in the most conspicuous place possible. I kind of agree that, to the extent that you want to leave some of these things in policy, which is easy to find, and easy for parents to access, more easily than administrative regulations, I think that's a good idea to keep those in there.
There's all of the other items that were deleted, there's nothing that would be in conflict with what best practices or what we currently do. I mean, another option would be that we just say that as we have a reading of 116, that we just say that we don't accept the TAFE recommendations for this policy as a way. Is that acceptable to state it that way as
You can
well?
do that or make modifications to their recommendations.
Okay. So I guess discussion, those are really our only two concerns is having it in policy to protect our nurses, which we consider best practice to require a doctor's note after the 5th day, and then to allow our trainers to still administer some over-the-counter medications only in certain situations.
So Holly, are you saying that it'd be prudent to just write it back up and just bring it to us for a second reading next time? Can we do that?
Yes.
Okay, you wanna do that, Mike?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That way everybody can see it.
Mhm.
Janet, you and Chris, okay with that?
That does allow us to accept some of the recommended changes and then
Right.
keep the two that we were concerned about.
But I agree with your concern and the way you wanna do things.
So I can clarify, what did you say, Maynard? I didn't hear you well. Next policy meeting, we bring it back for a first reading and then adopt it
Will you
separately?
bring it to the next policy committee? No, I think we need to bring it to the board next time? Or should we look at it again?
You could, or you could look at a cleaned up version at your next policy meeting. It's really your.
So we wouldn't bring it back until April.
I would say we could adopt those, policy updates 116 is presented by TASB with the exception of FFAC local. And have you all make that motion at the next time, then we can have a finalized version that we've been able to talk to Holly about and bring that to y'all for a first reading next
We'll
time.
bring it to the next policy committee, we'll bring the changes, and then we'll adopt it in second reading in April.
That'd be good.
Okay?
And then Mike's got the last one.
Yes, GKA local is the last of the local policies that have recommended changes, and this one's very simple. It was clarification, discussing if a person had been ejected or excluded and going through the grievance process. It was a clarification that if they do go through the grievance process, that they shall be permitted to address the board within 90 days is what the old policy says. Now it says 90 calendar days. So I'm assuming there was probably a challenge to this policy somewhere where there was a discrepancy, whether it was business days or calendar days, I would bet. So,
I think it might have been a commissioner's rule.
Yeah. So it just moved it to 90 calendar days. And I think legal made, and update 115 might have made this change. And I think now it's gone down to locals, if I remember it correctly. So it's just a clarification that it's 90 calendar days. If someone grieved some type of trespass order or some type of exclusion, they would have 90 calendar days to appear before the board is on the grievance process. So we obviously recommend that, accept that change.
Couple other notes on that policy update 116, Holly County has updated, or uploaded quite a few documents in Board Book for y'all on that. And it goes over one of the charts in there, goes over every policy. Our administrative team then takes a look at the policy and the recommendations and has an explanation of it in that chart, so that you can see that all of our administrators have taken a look at it. And then the ones that have the language changes, the local ones that we're asking for adoption, we brought to you tonight. So there is more information in that, and you got that chart in front of you right there. There's more information if you need to see it.
Not a whole lot of change, really.
A lot of it is legal stuff
Yeah.
and the state law stuff, and that's the way it goes, so,
Don't have any discretion there.
right.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank y'all.
All right. Any issues, concerns that we need to bring up to talk about later? Chris? Nope. Matt, anything?
No, sir.
All right, sir, we stand adjourned.